Hello and welcome to MountPodcast, the official podcast of everything Mount Prospect. I'm your host, Howard Kleinstein, the Director of Digital Communications for the Village of Mount Prospect. MountPodcast brings intriguing interviews with the movers and shakers in the 56. This podcast will give you, the listener, inside information about the people who make Mount Prospect a place where friendliness is a way of life. This is our very first podcast, and who better to inaugurate this series than our very own Mayor, Paul Hoefert. Thank you for coming in and talking to us, Mayor.
Well, thank you for asking me to be on today.
No problem. When I came up with this concept, you were the first person I thought of.
Well, I appreciate that, Howard. Thank you.
So let's get started with the interview, so to speak. Paul, tell us a little bit about where you grew up. Where did it all start?
Well, I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but shortly after that, my family moved to Cary, Illinois, which is out northwest, maybe about 20 miles from here. And that's where I grew up, essentially. And that's where I met my wife in 7th grade, and a match made in heaven.
Wow. Well, what was Cary like back then?
Cary in those days was pretty rural, which I liked as a young person. In those days, there wasn't as much parental concern, let's say. So I remember I'd say goodbye to my parents on a Saturday morning at 8 or 9 a.m. and go out for the day with my friends, right? And wander around and do whatever we did and come back for dinner at 6 p.m. And it was great to grow up in that kind of rural setting.
Yeah, you were free-range children.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you grew up in Cary, and you went away to college, I would imagine?
I did.
What did you study?
Well, I went to Miami of Ohio,
Uh-huh.
and I studied finance, so I have a degree in finance. And then after we got married and we settled in, I went to DePaul University and got my MBA in finance.
Okay. So you got married. Where did you settle initially?
Well, initially we settled in Des Plaines for about 3 years. And I'm going to tell you, I honestly, and this is not a dig on Des Plaines, but I didn't like the way the downtown was developing. And we lived in the downtown area. It was convenient for us at the time. So we started looking. We had a townhouse, so we started looking for a single-family home. And we looked at a lot of houses, and there were essentially 3 things that we were looking for. We wanted a fixer-upper that we could, an older home that we could fix up and turn it around and move on. Clearly that didn't happen. And we were looking for a shorter, Des Plaines was a shorter commute, but we lived in Cary, and that was a longer commute. And both Linda and I decided that was too far to commute, so that's why we moved in. And then finally, we wanted to walk to the train. And so we ended up on Evergreen Avenue, right by the water tower, and got everything that we wanted and more.
So you were working downtown at the time?
Yeah, I worked for Continental Bank, and Linda worked for First Chicago. 2 names that don't exist anymore.
No, not with all the consolidation that's gone on.
Exactly.
Yeah. So other than the proximity to the train, was there anything else you knew about Mount Prospect that attracted you to Mount Prospect?
Well, we had heard good things about Mount Prospect through a realtor, for sure, but also through some friends that lived here. And it was actually we worked with a realtor, a really wonderful person. She's gone now, but her name was Sally Lowing. And I'll bet Sally was very patient with us. As a young couple, I bet we looked at 50 houses, right? And this one friend of ours commuted, and one day he sees the house that we're in today. He sees a for sale sign out front, and so we moved on it. So Sally never she did show us the house, but she didn't identify the house for us. And that person was a good friend, and so they told us how much they liked living in Mount Prospect. And as I said, the rest is history. We we bought the house. And there were a number of things that attracted us to it, but it seemed like it was in a great neighborhood, and it was. And we had a barn, I think one of maybe 2 or 3 barns in Mount Prospect, and it was a fixer-upper. So we had all that we wanted.
Okay, it was kind of a historic house that you ended up in.
Yeah, I mean, locally historic.
Right.
It was the Bussey Florist family home.
Right.
And right next door is also a Bussey Florist family home, and next door on the other side was the Bussey Florist family lived close proximity to the floral property, which was actually right across the street. It was a big open area with some greenhouses on it and so on. By the time we came along, Harold and Carol Bussey were running the florist, and we knew something was going to happen because there was about 4 acres across the street from us. We figured some development would happen there someday, but what was really nice is we had Harold and Carol and Sylvia Bussey, who lived right next door, and they had all the history on the home, which we really appreciated.
Well, that barn kind of worked out pretty well for you. I know you're a car guy. You own a few cars.
Yes.
And it's got a very long driveway, and the barn itself is a pretty big garage, which I don't know how many cars you can fit in there, but
Too many.
okay. So let's move on and talk about how did you become involved in politics in Mount Prospect? What made you do that?
Well, a lot of people get involved because there's something happening in their immediate world that is upsetting to them, let's say. And as I said, right across the street from us was about 4 to 5 acres of undeveloped property that the village was very focused upon. And we didn't live in our house for more than about a year when the village started talking about redevelopment under tax increment financing. So Linda and I were obviously very interested in what was going to happen right across the street from our home. So we started attending meetings. And right out of the box, there was a proposal for a very dense development of apartments, and we had just moved out of Des Plaines, where there were condominiums and apartments going up all around us, and we just didn't feel good about that. Mm-hmm. And so we started attending meetings. Myself, along with a number of other people, rallied the neighborhood, and Carolyn Krause appointed me head of an ad hoc committee to find alternative developments, which we did. We found 7 different alternative developments. We approached developers, and the village board ultimately chose the townhouse development that exists today. So Carolyn listened to us. The board at that time listened to us, and not just me, but the entire ad hoc committee and the neighborhood. We would regularly turn out a couple of hundred people to a board meeting when that was up for discussion.
That was before they were videotaped and people could stay at home and watch them, I guess.
Well, I think they were videotaped, but people couldn't stay at home and watch them.
Yeah.
Actually, I take that back. They could watch them, but they were on videotape, I think. So.
Okay. Yeah.
But regardless, what I took away from that, and you asked me how did I get involved, that's how I got involved. But I appreciated the process, and so after that, I asked Carolyn Krause, who was then the mayor, if I could serve on a commission, and I ended up serving on the Downtown Redevelopment Commission. And then shortly after that, recycling was coming into vogue, and Linda and I had already been avid recyclers. We would take what we could to various places to be recycled, and so I became a charter member of the Recycling Commission, which later became the Solid Waste Commission. And then in 1989, I ran for the board. I attended board meetings for about 2 years, and you get kind of hooked, on the different things that are going on. And then in 1989, I decided to run for the board, and admittedly, I was not elected that year. A lot of good people were. Unfortunately, I was number 4 out of 3 positions that were open. But Skip Farley and Leo Flores encouraged me to run again, which I did. And so in 1991, I was elected, and I've been on the board ever since.
Okay, very good. So it was kind of you got involved through a NIMBY project, where
Yeah.
for those of you who don't understand that acronym, it means not in my backyard. But you stuck with it and got involved, and that's really kind of textbook how you get
It is.
in.
A lot of people get involved that way. There's
Yeah.
something that's disruptive, and again, they're personally disrupted by that, and they speak up, and they get involved. But we didn't just say that we didn't want development because we knew development was going to happen. So we, meaning the committee that was the ad hoc committee, we actively went out and sought developers. The village didn't do it. The committee did that, and we turned over those 7 developments or proposed developments to the board, and they chose the one that exists today.
Yeah, I see on Facebook all the time people saying, "Oh, it's not worth going to the board meeting to give your opinion. They've already made their minds up, and it's a done deal, and it's all rigged." But that's really not the case, is it?
It isn't the case, and having not only been on the board for 32 years now, but watching the board for probably 35 years, it never was the case during my time. It appears sometimes, it feels that way when you're on the other side of the ledger. And honestly, I used that same argument back in back in the late 80s when the dense development was proposed. It felt like it was just going to happen, but it didn't, because Carolyn and Leo and Skip and others, they listened to the people, which I was one of them, and they altered their plans. And that really impressed me, that they listened to us, and they didn't just shove it down our throats, so to speak.
Yeah, you can't always, some people think a victory is where you stop a project, but really the victory comes from maybe mitigating the project and getting people to listen to your ideas and to change it to where it's more palatable. And that's all politics is, compromise.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah. So I'm glad you also agree with my assessment, because I hear so much of the opposite, so much negativity out in the world. Okay, so you mentioned a few of your political mentors, Leo Floros and Skip Farley. Did you have any other?
Absolutely. Well, I certainly mentioned Skip and Leo, but I would also, as people that influenced me, I would also mention their spouses, Janice Farley and Lil Flores, both very active in the community, and both very impressive on a young guy who had just become a trustee. Carolyn Krause was certainly a big influence. She gave me my start, as I said, on a couple of commissions, and actually got me started with the Historical Society as well. Another person who was not a elected person was Dolores Howe. Dolores was tenacious. Not everybody remembers Dolores, but Dolores, along with a lot of other people, started the Historical Society, and also was the head of the chamber at one time, and worked with the library and so on and so forth. And Dolores became a really good friend and gave me lots of advice as I began my, lots of positive advice as I began my political career. Also, relative to my contemporaries, I would tell you that Tim Corcoran, who was one of the people that ran for the board in '89 and did get elected, and also another person a little bit later, Michelle Scourin, who served on many, many commissions, boards, the Board of Education, and so on and so forth. Those two people had a huge impact on me relative to their approach to serving the community. And then, and you know, the list could go on from there, but, and also I would tell you, and this is going to sound maybe a little corny, but I would tell you that William Bussey, who was our first mayor, I've learned a lot about William Bussey over the years. In fact, I've impersonated him at the cemetery walk over at St. Paul Cemetery. The Historical Society puts on a cemetery walk. And I played him, and because I played him, I had to learn a lot about him. And truly an impressive individual who lived on a farm and came in to what was to become Mount Prospect, brought his relatives with him, and got us going as a community, and actually was instrumental in getting Mount Prospect incorporated. And it goes on from there. But one of the really big accomplishments, he had lots of them, but one of the really big ones was that he served for 50 years on the Cook County Board. A long time, right? And he got up every day, according to how, as I understand it, he got up every day, went down, got a trim and a shave, got on the train, and went down to the city to serve on the board. But his first love was clearly Mount Prospect.
Okay. You know, so when you were first elected and you're a young trustee, what were your hopes? What were you trying to accomplish with your newly found political power?
So I think as I already said, I was very influenced by the fact that the sitting board at that time, as I watched them for 2 years, when citizens came to the mic, and I already told you about the development across the street from my house, but when citizens came to the mic, they intently listened to what that lone citizen had to say or what a group of citizens had to say. And so watching that, I think one of my goals as I became a young trustee was to really listen to the people. And if you look at my literature, it always speaks to the fact that I will listen to the people, I will be the voice of the people, that kind of thought, because again, I was impressed by it, but that's why we're up there, right? Sometimes it becomes a little difficult if it's a lone voice who's speaking on for their own personal issue. And sometimes they'll say that they represent the neighborhood when you later find out that they're not. But just overall, listening to the people and really forming the community in the way that the citizens would have us do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you served as trustee for 29 years?
No, 30 years.
30 years, and then you decided you wanted to become mayor. Why did you want to take that step to become mayor?
Well, Howard, there were a lot of things over 30 years where there isn't a trustee that doesn't think about becoming mayor. You know, I certainly am not in the heads of all the trustees from the past, but I'm sure every trustee gives it some thought, right? And I had given it thought over the years, but the time was, the time never was right to do it before because of my personal life, my work life, and so on and so forth. When the opportunity presented itself 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, I decided that the time was right, and I moved forward on it. And I was excited to do so. And it has worked out, I think it has worked out very well, but it's been a real honor being the mayor of Mount Prospect, no doubt about that.
Okay. So you've been in Mount Prospect for 35 plus years.
40.
40 plus years. So how has the village changed in that time? What is the biggest changes you've seen between the Mount Prospect you first moved into and the Mount Prospect as we sit here today?
That's an interesting question because it's every every town across the nation evolves, right? And I always think of the phrase, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So when we moved to Mount Prospect, it was a much older demographic that was residing here. In fact, we live by the water tower, that area that they call the Small Triangle, bounded by Central, Northwest Highway, and 83. That neighborhood was our neighborhood, was essentially all older people who had either built those homes or moved into them shortly after those homes being built. And when we started having children, there were literally no children within a 3 or 4 block radius. We were the young people in the neighborhood. That changed pretty quickly, and a lot of young people moved in, and our kids had, kids to play with and so on and so forth. And then it aged again, right? And now today, we would be considered part of that older demographic in our neighborhood. But there isn't a day that goes by that I don't look out the window and see people walking with their little ones or pushing the strollers. And so I would tell you from 30 years ago to now, I would say that it's a younger demographic. But that turns over, and then those people will age, and then it turns over again. But right now, I think we're in a stage of a renewal. A lot of younger people moving into town. They certainly want to. I think they find Mount Prospect desirable. They find that the schools are excellent, and they want to raise their kids in a town that values them and values good education. And also the park facilities and such in our town are outstanding. So people have leisure, there are leisure opportunities, and so on and so forth. So I think that's what over the last 30 years, again, you've seen that turnover.
Okay. Well, if you had to say one thing was the best change for Mount Prospect in that time, what would you choose?
Well, I would say that, development, over the last 30 years, development has been kind of a cornerstone of the work that the village board has done. And it's one, as I said, it was one of the reasons that I got involved. But in the last, and there was development during that entire time. But in the last 7 to 10 years, development has accelerated, and many of the properties that were either inappropriate in the downtown or were degraded to a point where they needed to be redeveloped are now redeveloping, and we see a lot of activity. That says a couple of things. One is the development community sees opportunity here in Mount Prospect. They're willing to put down their risk capital and spend it here in Mount Prospect. And that is attracting, again, a younger demographic. And when you attract the younger demographic, your property values remain strong. And that's one of the really critical things that you always want in your community. You want your property values to remain strong. If they don't remain strong, a whole lot of things start to happen. Your tax revenues maybe aren't as good as they should be. Your town gets stuck in the past, and so on and so forth. I don't think we're stuck in the past at all. And I'm not just talking about the downtown. We have been very downtown-centric, but if you look at the South Mount Prospect plan, if you look at some really positive things that are happening up north, certainly with Randhurst in the last 10 or 15 years, but there's going to be, I think, some very positive things coming out of the Randhurst Village development in a short period of time. I think you're going to see, it's not I think, you will see a renewal of Mount Prospect, but not just in the downtown, across our town from head to toe. And that's exciting as the mayor. That's exciting for me to see. And it also gives us, our board, an opportunity to stay off the residential property tax. So out of the last 5 years, 4 of those years, there's been no property tax increase or no levy increase um, to the people of Mount Prospect. Doesn't mean their taxes may not have gone up because of other taxing bodies and so on and so forth, but the village board has had no increase because of these positive events.
Yeah, no increase on the village's portion of the real estate tax
Which is
bill.
about 10% of your tax bill.
Yeah. Okay. So, how do you think Mount Prospect manages to hold on to its small town feel? I hear a lot of people talking about how Mount Prospect feels like a small town.
I talk a lot about that, right? And I may be one of the most prolific people out there that talks to other people about moving to Mount Prospect and what a great place it is, not just because I'm the mayor or formerly a trustee, but because I truly love this community. And I think the small town feel that we have is one of the attractive things. But the reality is we're the 24th largest community in the state of Illinois. You know, you've got your biggie, Chicago, and then you could name, Aurora, Joliet, and it goes Elgin and others. But when you go down that list and you see that we're the 24th largest, we're a very large community relative to population. When I look at that list beyond us, there's a lot of names on there that I thought were bigger than Mount Prospect that are not. But to answer your question, what is it about Mount Prospect? And this is going to sound, a little corny too, but it's the people, the neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods are really tight, and lots of block parties that go on, right? And people getting to know people, and people helping people, and so on and so forth. I think that's what is the catalyst for giving us a small town feel. But the other thing is we have a special events commission that focuses on community events, not only in the downtown but around town. And these community events draw people not only from Mount Prospect, but draw people from Mount Prospect to get out and meet others around town. Also, I think we have scaled our development in the downtown and frankly across the village appropriately. We don't have, massive high rises, and yes, we're urban, suburban, but we still have that feel certainly again in our downtown, but throughout our community. One of the things early on that, as I became a trustee, the board talked a lot about was staying out of the single-family residential ring in terms of the downtown area, in terms of development. A lot of towns haven't done that. They've gone into the residential areas and torn down homes and put up more and more structures, commercial-type structures and so on. We haven't done that. And I think that was purposeful. And I think that's also what has created that feel. But I do think, honestly, it's the neighborhoods. It really is the neighborhoods. When you go into the neighborhoods and you see the people out, it's every little neighborhood has that small town feel.
Yeah.
So early on, and all through my time on the board, I have focused on protecting our residential neighborhoods from commercial encroachment, not just tearing down houses and such, but we would have people that would start a car repair business in their garage, or start some kind of commercial activity out of their house that was obtrusive, and we put an ordinance in place to stop that, and also parking of commercial vehicles and things like that really help to prevent, really help to keep it residential and to keep things positive.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, going back to your years as a trustee, you were not in favor of everything that came before you. Nobody could be. Can you name me one or two things where you were against it and it passed and you were proven right?
There's one biggie. that I was very outspoken about. And I don't want these comments to in any way say that the board at that time didn't feel they were right or didn't, you know, that board at that time felt they were doing the right thing. Okay, so I don't take that away from them, the sitting board members. But back in maybe about 2005, there was a proposal for a development on, again, not the residential small triangle, but here uptown, we call it the small triangle, where the Old Town Inn was.
Station 34 is
Station
there.
34, and that small area. There was a proposal for a development, which I felt was too dense, was too urban, was too expensive because it required the village, I believe, to contribute too much of the taxpayers' dollars to it. And I just felt it wouldn't be successful, and it didn't blend with our downtown. It had a whole lot of things wrong, but one of the major things was that I just felt like we were contributing too much of the taxpayers' resources to it. And so I fought it tooth and nail. And at that time, the rest of the board was going the other direction on it. And I was very, very outspoken. And we had a lot of evenings, Tuesday evenings, where we discussed it as a board, we discussed it with the developer, we discussed it with the community. I really felt that I was listening to the people because I got a lot of positive positive input from the people across the village saying, yeah, we don't like this development, keep up the fight. Well, ultimately, the developer didn't go forward, and I don't know that it was so much about the fact that I really spoke out against it, but if anything happened, it slowed the process down, and then, as we all know, the Great Recession occurred, and that development would have been half done. God knows what would have happened after that, right? I don't think it would have been completed as proposed, and we would have had an albatross sitting right in the middle of our downtown. And so, again, I opposed that. I opposed buying a number of the properties in that downtown area, in that small triangle as well, at that time, because I thought they were too highly priced. And ultimately, development did occur. And it may still occur in the small triangle, but it, I think, is appropriately scaled. And it is done in such a way that it's walkable, and it's really presents a good feeling. So even though development was slow, development did occur. And more might occur on that small triangle, I don't know. But I think it is better. It's a better plan that's there now than would have been there.
Okay, I remember another thing that you pushed for, not necessarily on the board, but as a historical society member, was saving the general store.
I did. A lot of people probably don't know this, but the Capanary's ice cream building was our general store. It was built in 1870 and was the hub of what was to become Mount Prospect. It was the post office. It was where you bought your dry goods and your material and so on and so forth. And it sat right at the corner of Northwest Highway and Route 83, Elmhurst. And it was in the way of development. And I took that project. I asked the board, we had a proposal for a development. I asked the board, give me 3 months, and I will put together a plan to move the building and redevelop it on a different site and save what I considered maybe the most historic building in all of our downtown. And I did that. And I don't like to say I because there were a lot of people involved, but I was the person who drove that project forward. And I found a building mover that could actually, there aren't a lot of them around these days because a lot of people don't move buildings, But I found a building mover. I found a lot of, um, in the development community or in the service community, I found a lot of people that were local, that were willing to contribute and, contribute for a no-cost contribution. And so we got the building moved to where it is today, Captain Ice Cream on Pine Street. And at that time, our fire chief, Chief Fagola, he's also an electrician, and he did all the wiring for no cost. That was out of the goodness of his heart. The kids from Forest View that were learning the trades, they came in and did a lot of the demo work and so on and so forth. And just a lot of contributions like that, and they're all listed over there on a plaque. And as I said, the board at that time gave me enough time to get that done, and then the new development occurred. And today that building marks, it's still with us. As I said, it's one of the first buildings, commercial buildings in the downtown area, and it's a good story all around.
Oh, it's a fantastic success story of repurposing of a historic building.
So after you, you have a lot of sleepless nights when you work on a project like that. So, getting it all organized, getting the building moved, it actually was crooked. When we got it situated, one night we drove by, Linda and I drove by, and I was looking at it, and I said to her, I think that building is leaning. And we looked at it, and sure enough, we talked to the building department. They came out and they shot some sight lines, and sure enough, it was leaning. So again, Chief Fagola and his dad, they got some come-alongs and they straightened the building up, and then they strapped it on the inside and straightened the building up. I forgot where I was going. What? Tell me again what
Well, I just said what a success story it was that you were able to repurpose.
So we get the building straightened up, and then we get it all in place. But so you talk about repurposing. Then the big worry was, okay, now what are we going to do with it, right? You have this old building that has been, redone, not to it's been redone in the way that it looked back when it was a general store. What are we going to do with it? I thought, well, a dentist, an attorney, and then the Dix family came along and said, we'd like to open up an ice cream store. And in my professional background, I'd had some experience with people that went into the ice cream business. And I said to them, it was funny because I said to them, it's a pretty high-risk business. And you really have to commit long hours and so on and so forth. And they were, no, we understand that. We're really committed to this, and so on and so forth. Well, they did go into the building, and as you know, that is a huge success story. Not only in Mount Prospect, but in the Chicagoland area. They've been voted the best ice cream in the Chicagoland area over and over again. They've delivered ice cream to the presidents of the United States. And they not only, at that time it was a retail business, but then they went on to a commercial business. And the Dix family has really made a successful ongoing business starting out in that building, and it's still there today, as we all know.
Yeah.
And we got a little pocket park out of it as well, right next door. The one thing that partly made it possible too was the village owned that property. There had been a well house on the property, which the village had abandoned. So we had a place to move the building at no cost. But again, the Dixes and their entrepreneurial spirit really flourished in that building, and today it's a landmark, and not only because of the building, but because of their foresight.
Yeah, I know that nationwide, people who are foodies and are into ice cream, when they talk about Chicago, Capanaries is one of the locations you must go to if you like ice cream.
Exactly.
And so people will travel across the country, across the world, and end up in Mount Prospect.
What's interesting is this summer, Linda and I were up in Richmond, Illinois. It's a antique town up near the border, and we went into a little ice cream shop there and to get some ice cream. And I was chatting it up with the owner, and I said, "So where do you get your ice cream?" And he said, "Capanaries in Mount Prospect." I said, "You're not going to believe this. I'm from Mount Prospect, and I helped. I helped create the building that they got going with, and it's been a real success story. And so it's kind of a 6 degrees of separation kind of thing."
Yeah. Well, that's it's so fantastic. Let's bring it back a little bit towards you. And what would you term, if you had to come up with one, what is your greatest political achievement? What is the thing that you'd be most proud of?
It's, I guess on a high level basis, it's what I said before. I really, I do really focus on listening to the people. I really do. And I think other board members too, don't get me wrong. But ever since that first experience, and sometimes the voice of the people is not exactly in line with maybe what I'm thinking, right? But I'm not up there to, sometimes you're flying by the seat of your pants because you're not getting any input from the community. So you do act and you think about the community and you think, what would the community want, or what would be good, or so on and so forth. But when you have direct input from the community, and lots of it, you need to listen to that, and you need, and maybe it's not, you work with them, work with the people that are bringing that forward, and so maybe it's some variation on that theme, but you really do need to listen to the people. After all, it's their village. Yeah, it's my village too, but because I live here, but as well. But you really do need to listen, and so if I were to say what I thought was my greatest political achievement, would be doing just that, listening, and reflecting what the people want in their community. And that has changed over the years. Early on, a lot of people did not want our downtown to change. They didn't want a building over 3 or 4 stories and so on. As time has gone on, that narrative has changed, and people are good with taller buildings, not high, not high rises, but for the most part, let's say 5 or 6 story buildings, in the right areas. And the board and myself, we've listened to that, and we have a couple of projects going on right now that reflect that. This all feels like it's about the downtown, but another thing that I've heard over the years is you've got to get off the property tax, and I know I've mentioned this already, and that South Mount Prospect plan, which I was certainly supportive of, and as well as the entire board, but under our current village manager, we were able to bring that forward, and now with the redevelopment of the United property and the redevelopment of Randhurst 10 years ago, and so on and so forth, those kinds of projects have really helped us to stay off the residential property tax. And that's important because I know we're only about 10% of the tax bill, but every little bit helps. And so I hope that it helps people stay in their homes as they age. A lot of the homes in town are sized such that older people can continue to live in the home they've lived in all of their lives. Yeah. Another thing is, pardon me for clearing my throat. Another thing is, I'm all about the greater good, I really am, but not at the expense of individual rights. And a short time ago, we were talking about the South Mountain Prospect Plan and what we hope to do and so on and so forth. And down near the United property, there are 6 homes that are kind of in the middle of all this activity. And the people that live there, we had no vision for redeveloping their homes, tearing their homes down. But they felt, because of everything going on, they felt that we as a board did. And they came before us, and one was a woman who had lived in her home since she was a young, very young woman, a girl, youngster. And she lived there with her parents as she grew older, and then her parents passed away, and she still lives in that home. And she came before us and said, I've lived in my home since 1960 or 62 or something. And I said, I'm telling you, honestly, we have no vision of taking your property. But if that were to happen, if a future board were to have visions of coming after you, I will join you arm in arm, and we will defend your property. And I was totally serious about that.
Yeah, I think you are. So, what would you suggest to anyone who's looking currently to get involved in Mount Prospect politics? How should they start?
Well, I think you have to walk before you run, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, I think, get involved in the community. It doesn't mean that you can't run for the village board right out of the box. It doesn't, and people have. But I think it's better to get involved in the community in whatever way that involvement for you is appropriate. Coaching a team, doing whatever. And then I think you want to get yourself on a commission or a board. You want to get maybe active in one of our service organizations here in town. And then another one that I think is important is I think you should start attending the village board meeting. This is if you want to become a village trustee or the mayor. I think you need to attend the meetings. The next best thing is I think you need to watch the meetings weekly and see what's happening in your community at the village board level. And then I think you need to put yourself out there. You need to share your opinions. You need to share your viewpoints. You need to get yourself known. I told you the first time I ran, I didn't get elected. And my name was in the newspaper all the time. And in those days, there wasn't social media. I really thought I was well known throughout the community. So back in '88, that's what you have to declare that you're going to run. I started going door to door, and 3 blocks from my house, 4 blocks from the downtown area, I'm knocking on doors, and people didn't know who I was. They didn't know about the development uptown. I really thought everybody knew, right? And so I realized this is going to be an uphill battle. I really got to get myself known. And as I said, I was the 4th vote getter, but it wasn't enough to get elected that year. But in 1991, I really, really worked hard at it. I worked hard at it in '89 as well, but I worked that much harder in '91. And I did get my face out there a lot more throughout the community. And I knocked on a lot of doors, and it was successful. So that's the way I did it. But I think that's still a viable way to do it today. But at the very least, you got to get yourself involved. You got to step up.
Yeah, very, very much so. I agree with you about attending board meetings. It's where the rubber hits the road. So the village has kind of had modernization of times and ideas and mores. We've been tasked with upgrading our diversity, equity, and inclusion for the village. Tell me what your thoughts are on how we're doing with that.
I think DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is on the forefront today, and it should be. And we have to make sure that, our community is diverse, and we do live in a multicultural community. We have to make sure that our workforce in the village is diverse. And we have to make sure that people feel included. And I would tell you that being in the banking industry all my life, the banking industry was all over diversity, equity, and inclusion for the last 30 years. A lot of that, I would tell you, was driven by the government. I'm not sure the industry would have done it on their own, but it was good, and so I had that to go on. But I would say that being a multicultural community, we've tried to improve the life of all of our people in town, and we have also focused on helping people of all cultures, of all colors, of all genders, and so forth, and identifications, to come to our town and to live here and enjoy their lives here. It's on the forefront now, and so we've recently completed our study, and I think we're on the right. I think there's certainly a lot of work to do, but I feel like we are doing the right things. We as a community, we as a village, we as staff, are doing the right things on that journey. We have, obviously, we'll always have a ways to go, right? You're never done with DE&I, but we're very focused on making sure our workforce in the village of Mount Prospect is diverse and giving people of color and identification opportunities here. And I think that is showing in the results. Again, we have a ways to go, but I really think we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and we'd like to see that too reflected in our elected officials. We have had difficulties with that, but we're always open in Mount Prospect to having people included in boards and commissions and things like that, and we would openly encourage people to run for elected position who are...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've had, on the gender side, we've had 3 mayors in recent history that were female. How great was that? In fact, my predecessor was a female, and so, attracting people of various cultures and such to get active in the village is part of my goal, and getting them involved in boards and commissions. The one thing I have said is I won't remove people from boards and commissions who are older, who are maybe not the color that, they're not diverse and so on, but they've given a lot of time and effort. I won't take those people away. They've contributed. But when they tell me that their time is up, then we will look to fill those roles with diverse individuals. And I've committed to that. So I'm always looking for pools of, I shouldn't say pools, but people who want to serve. We keep lists, people apply for boards and commissions, and we keep that. That's what I meant by a pool. We keep those applications. And when the time is right, we'll look to make the boards and commissions more diverse. And that will happen.
And for anybody who's looking to apply for a board and commission, you can always go to mountprospect.org, and under the Boards and Commission tab, you can find an application form. So, I was going to kind of wrap things up with what you think your greatest legacy is, and kind of how you'd like to be remembered.
I'd like to think that my time is not done. So, in terms of a legacy,
Not pushing you out.
yeah. But you, of course, you think about, what mark will I leave or have I left? And I think part of it is creating a desirable community, helping create a desirable community. None of this is just Paul Hoefert doing it all on his own, right? You have committed board members, you have committed staff, you have people that in the community that are out there working on a volunteer basis every day. But it's helping to make a desirable community. That would certainly be one of the things I'd like to be remembered for. I already said, but maintaining and growing our property values so that when the time comes for people to turn their home over, they can turn it over at a fair price and move on and do whatever they're going to do. And also, as I said, good property values bring development, right? And that helps our community in a great way. I've always focused on keeping our finances strong. I think our finances have been strong since William Bussey, incorporated our community back in 1917. We've gone through some rough years, but we've been very responsible with the money that the people have given us in taxes and fees and so on. We've been very responsible in the ways we spend that money, and because we have, it has given us flexibility. And as I said, in recent history with the Great Recession, that impacted us in a big way, and unfortunately we had to let a few people go, but we weathered the storm really well. And that's important. Sometimes, and it's just like in your own home, if you spend out to the edge, right? And when things go the wrong direction on you, you maybe can't recover, but we weathered that storm. So keeping our financials strong. And every time I run, I always make sure that people understand the real purpose of our village board is to provide or to create policies that create high quality, appropriately priced village services that meet the needs of the people, right? That's what a village board is all about. Be that police and fire and public works and human services and all the other things that we do. And I think we accomplished that in a big way and have, certainly during my time on the board, but I think even way before that. The other thing is, I have a very strong love of our community. I obviously don't do this for the money.
No.
I think that's another thing. I think if you're going to run for the board, be on the board, it's not about enriching yourself, certainly monetarily. It's about being committed to your community and doing what's right and serving others. That's been a kind of a cornerstone of my life, is serving others. I love to do it. I love to help people and so on. And that's that I hope that I will be remembered for that. And it's not just on the village board. I've done other things as well. And then finally, as I said, caring about our citizens, caring about the people of Mount Prospect, and as I guess I've drilled home, is making sure that they remember that I listened, and will listen, and will do for them as long as they want me to sit in the seat of the mayor. So I really appreciate this time, Howard.
Oh, thank you for coming in and talking to me. This has been great. And thank you for joining us. If you've been listening to MountPodcast can be found on your favorite podcast download sites and on the village website, mountprospect.org. Join us next time as we bring you another conversation with someone worth talking to in Mount Prospect. See you then.